The Great Pyramid of Giza stands to this day as one of Earth's greatest mysteries. Despite centuries of research, scientists are still not totally sure how it was built or its purpose. Conventional wisdom says it was constructed as a tomb for the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khufu, yet many have pointed out that it lacks the characteristics which define other tombs across Egypt. No human remains have ever been found within it, neither have any artifacts, jewelry, or art, or the household items an entombed pharaoh would be buried with for use in the afterlife. Because these holes in the idea of the Great Pyramid as a tomb exist, many other theories have emerged over the years explaining its purpose, from an astrological temple to a place for storing grain and beyond. One of the most astounding theories of all emerged in the 1960s thanks to a man named Edward Kunkel. In 1962, Kunkel published a book entitled Pharaoh's Pump, which shook up the world of Egyptology. In it, he argued that the passages and chambers in and beneath the Great Pyramid were the conduits and reservoirs of a giant water pump which would have been used to send water out into the desert to irrigate the land. According to Kunkel, the pyramid actually contained 2 pumps, one underground, represented by the pyramid's mysterious subterranean chamber, and the other one above ground in the middle and upper chambers. Together, they would create 2 streams which would exit the pyramid through shafts in the north and south sides. Unsurprisingly, Kunkel's work caused great skepticism, not only from Egyptologists who rejected the theory outright, but from engineers who pointed out that Kunkel's design would have required the creation of a vacuum, a number of valves, and some type of combustible fuel and combustion chamber to drive the pump. Yet, not bound by the same restrictions as mainstream Egyptology, many engineers began to look closer at Kunkel's work, realizing that it was not totally without merit. While Kunkel's 2-pump design would likely not have been possible, some engineers noted that a ram pump might actually make sense. A ram pump is a simple device used for centuries to move water from a reservoir to somewhere else using 2 moving parts and the force of gravity. Could the builders of the Great Pyramid really have created a ram pump on such a massive scale? With the possibility established, other researchers and scholars picked up on the idea, designing a theoretical layout in which the Great Pyramid was fed with water from the Western Nile and nearby Lake Moeris, which each sat at a higher elevation, making them, according to researchers, the perfect sources for a gravity-fed water system on the Giza Plateau. Some even believe that the retaining wall, which is known to have once surrounded the pyramid complex, could have been an embankment for an on-site reservoir. As more and more people came to believe that the Great Pyramid really could have been an enormous ancient water pump, they were backed by one simple overarching argument: economics. Think about it. The Great Pyramid is made up of 2.3 million blocks, each weighing between 25 and 80 tons, meaning that if workers moved and laid 12 blocks per hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would have taken 20 years to construct. More than that, it has been estimated that, adjusted into modern dollar values, the pyramid would have cost more than $5 billion to create. Simply, why go to all this trouble and all this expense just for a tomb? Obviously, Egyptian pharaohs had more leeway than modern democratically elected leaders, but they were not totally unbound from the realities of finance and economics. Would it not make more sense to go to all this trouble for something which was going to provide a higher return on investment, like, say, a water pump, which would allow you to irrigate your civilization and feed your people? Here, we must take a step back in order to get to the point. If the Great Pyramid really was an enormous water pump, then it must have been pumping the water somewhere. This is where some have connected the dots and returned to the mysterious pit at Zayat el Aryan. They believe that the site was not an unfinished pyramid, but an outflow location for water pumped by the Great Pyramid, the giant pit designed as a reservoir for water pumped in from below. They looked to the oval tub and how tightly it was sealed over with clay and lime, and theorized that perhaps this was where the water came up. Perhaps it had been sealed at a time when the pump was no longer in use to prevent leaking. The pit eventually filled with a tangled mass of limestone blocks at a later date, as if burying a spring. Remember, when Barsanti had cleared these blocks, the water from a torrential rainstorm had seeped into the ground. Barsanti thought this was due to the presence of hidden apartments, but perhaps it was actually due to the water seeping into an unused underground water system. Could the ancients really have built an underground irrigation system driven by a mighty pump which stretched to Zayat el-Aryan and across Egypt? In modern times, research on the subject has continued, and in fact, science is beginning to reveal that it might actually go much further than pumping water for irrigation. Early in 1999, a marine engineer named John Cadman was perusing the shelves at a used bookstore when he stumbled across an old, dusty copy of a most unusual book written by one Edward Kunkel and entitled Pharaoh's Pump. As an expert in hydraulics, the book intrigued Cadman, so he purchased it and took it home. When he began to read it more closely, he quickly realized that Kunkel's idea was not as ridiculous as he had initially assumed. Wanting to know more, Cadman began to learn everything he could about the Great Pyramid. Almost immediately, what he discovered captivated him. The Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber, he realized, looked eerily like the layout for a ram pump. He took his research further, noting from photographs that the subterranean chamber showed obvious signs of water damage. Particularly on the ceiling, where signs of cavitation, which is caused by gas bubbles in water due to violent churning, were evident, as well as clear damage from compression waves striking it. In other words, it was not just that the subterranean chamber could work as a water pump, but, according to Cadman's trained eyes, it appeared it had worked as such. At this point, Cadman knew what he had to do. He must draw upon his years of experience with hydraulics and create his own scale model of the pyramid and its subterranean chamber to see if it would really work as a water pump. In July of '99, he built his first model, using a nearby river as a reservoir. Unfortunately, the model did not work, first leaking, then cracking, and failing to pump water as he had hoped. But Cadman would not give up that easily. He built another model, then another, both of which suffered the same fate as the first. But on his fourth try, he got everything right, and much to Cadman's delight, his pump worked. This proved to Cadman, beyond a doubt, that the Great Pyramid could have functioned as a giant water pump, and that surely this was not by accident. It was clear, he asserted, that the creators of the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber had known exactly what they were doing. This was the breakthrough that disciples of Edward Kunkel's original work in the 1960s had been waiting for. The tangible proof that a Great Pyramid water pump was more than just speculation. And yet, as Cadman continued his research, the results got even more mind-blowing and, in fact, went far beyond the mere pumping of water. Having proved that the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber could function as a water pump, Cadman built a new, bigger model and encased it in concrete in order to simulate the effects of the pump operating underground. He moved the model, which weighed over 500 pounds, to a seasonal creek with a pond serving as a reservoir. As this model began to work, Cadman immediately noticed something which shocked him. Encased in concrete, the pump was creating a vertical compression wave, a recurring heartbeat-like thump, which could be felt through the ground 20 feet away and heard more than 100 feet away. Cadman realized that what he had constructed went far beyond just a water pump. Because of the powerful waves it generated, Cadman renamed this device a pulse generator. Truly, this changed everything. If the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber was generating pulse waves, these waves would have moved through the granite upper chambers and passageways of the pyramid and, due to granite's reflective properties, created ionization in the atmosphere, in effect producing an electric field. Put more simply, the pulses created by the subterranean pump would have interacted with the pyramid's granite to produce electricity. It appeared that Cadman had not only proven that the Great Pyramid could function as a water pump to move water around Egypt for irrigation, but one which could actually create electricity in ancient times. Could this really be possible? Of course, those who have watched this channel before will know that the idea of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator did not start with John Cadman. In fact, as early as the turn of the 20th century, it appeared prominently in the work of famed inventor Nikola Tesla. If you are not familiar with the greatness of Tesla, you're going to want to watch our complete video on Tesla's secret inventions that were lost or censored. But while many of you will already be aware of the work of Tesla, you may not be aware of his obsession with ancient Egypt, and specifically the pyramids, which he studied in detail, wrote about, and incorporated into his work. Consider, in 1905, Tesla filed a patent titled Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through a Natural Medium, which contained the design for something called Tesla's electromagnetic pyramid. Supplementing his genius with what he had learned about ancient Egypt, his idea was to use a huge pyramid-like structure to project energy skyward, where it could then be harnessed by individual receptors around the world. Interestingly, Tesla actually built a model of his electromagnetic pyramid known as Wardenclyffe Tower, a 187-foot tall structure topped with a 55-ton dome of conductive metal. Unfortunately, before he could conclusively prove that his model could create energy, Tesla lost his funding and the project was abandoned. And yet, even though Tesla's work on electromagnetic pyramids disappeared, the idea did not. Thanks to Tesla, many began to look at the Great Pyramid with fresh eyes, and specifically its original makeup, covered in white tufa limestone blocks, which are known for unparalleled insulating properties. Its tunnels and chambers beneath lined with granite, a well-known electrical conductor. Simply, this would have been the perfect layout if the intent was to create and utilize electricity. Little granite channels of electrical conductivity surrounded by insulation, not unlike copper wires encased in rubber in modern electronic devices. Moreover, it is known that the Great Pyramid was originally topped by a capstone of gold, one of the most electrically conductive materials on Earth, similar to how Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower was topped with a 55-ton metal ball. In other words, if the Great Pyramid was designed for electricity, its builders couldn't have done it better, and if it wasn't, well, in an historic coincidence, they'd accidentally stumbled into the perfect design. Indeed, so suggestive was the evidence that the idea continued to develop into modern times. Christopher Dunn is a mechanical engineer who has worked for more than half a century at the highest levels of aerospace manufacturing. In the 1970s, Dunn began to develop an interest in the mysteries of the Great Pyramid of Giza. At the same time as he worked his day job in the aerospace industry, he began spending his spare time researching the Great Pyramid from a mechanical engineering perspective. Slowly but surely, he came to the belief that there was more to the pyramid than it seemed. In his words, "I came to the conclusion that with such an investment of resources and the extreme precision which was crafted into the building, it was a building that functioned as a machine, and the machine was used to harness energy from the earth. I was inspired to research and discover how this machine operated." For more than 20 years, he conducted his research, becoming a prominent expert on the subject, publishing dozens of articles and appearing as a trusted voice across mainstream television. In 1998, 1 year before John Cadman's legendary experiments, which proved the electrical capacity of the Great Pyramid, Dunn finally published his seminal work, titled The Giza Power Plant. The book meticulously described a system in which the Great Pyramid drew seismic energy from the earth, producing electricity in the king's chamber through the use of hydrogen created by a chemical reaction in the queen's chamber. So groundbreaking was Dunn's work that it inspired researchers around the world to follow his lead. For more than 2 decades, research has continued and expanded, becoming only more astonishing every year. In fact, more than ever, science, and specifically mainstream science, is taking the idea of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator seriously. Indeed, in 2018, a study was published in the prestigious Journal of Applied Physics, which examined the Great Pyramid's response to radio waves and concluded that the pyramid could in fact concentrate electromagnetic energy in its internal chambers as well as under its base, seeming to confirm the research of Cadman and the ideas of Tesla. Then, in 2019, a new book was published by Egyptologists James Brown and J.J. and Desiree Hertak, entitled Giza's Industrial Complex, which built on the work of Dunn to suggest that the entire Giza Plateau functioned as an energy-generating system. According to the authors, the structures around and beneath the plateau were designed to activate a sophisticated process of water splitting, which would allow hydrogen to be used as a fuel source. As they put in the book, there is good evidence that the Great Pyramid was a gigantic water processing plant to create electrified water. It is indicative of how far the idea of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator has come, that the book and the idea were not immediately written off as ridiculous. In fact, instead of being mocked, the book actually won awards, including the prestigious New York City Big Book Award. Again, now more than ever, mainstream science views the possibility of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator as eminently possible. With this in mind, let's return to where we started, to Zayat el-Aryan. Could the pit at Zayat el-Aryan have been connected to the Great Pyramid by underground passages used to move water, as many have suggested, but not for the purpose of irrigation, rather to move electrified water used to fuel an ancient civilization, as Brown and Hertox proposed? Maybe this has something to do with the black residue found in the pit's oval tub by Barsanti. Could this be evidence of some sort of electrical burning or chemical process? The polished mirror-like tub, the place where electricity was generated? Perhaps this is why research on the site was so abruptly shut down in 1964, why it is now locked within a well-guarded military zone. Perhaps beneath the pit at Zayat el-Aryan, hidden in an area Alessandro Barsanti tried so hard to get to, is the proof of an electrical ancient Egypt, the type of secrets which would totally change our understanding of human history.
Yes.
Okay, this here is on the Great Pyramid's wastegate. They had a very simple valve on it, the bottom of it, down in front of the Sphinx Temple. So it's about 2,000 feet away from the Great Pyramid itself, going through an underground shaft. But the mechanism that they used to create the hydraulic pulse was actually just basically a simple check valve. This is a version. And all a check valve, water check valve is, it has a flap that allows water to go through one direction and then not the other. That's all it is. So what they did is put the valve backwards. So now the water actually does not go through it. And so it's normally closed, but then they flipped it upside down. So you have a little gravitational spring. Gravitational acceleration opens up the valve. And so water will stream by here, and as it gets up enough velocity, it'll swing that shut, the valve shut, and it'll stop the water instantaneously, and that creates a water hammer, a shock wave, a very intense shock wave. So we're going to put this on the wastegate line. And the wastegate is actually within this structure here, and this would have been the Nile. It would be bigger, and the Sphinx would be approximately about 6 foot. It would be at a slight angle out here. So it gives kind of proximity. So what I'm going to do here is taking the check valve, and the water's not running at this moment, but I'm just going to put it on there. I'm just taking it, I'm going to put it in the reverse position, and I'm just going to screw it onto the end of the wastegate line, which actually has a valve on it, so I can get on a ton of water coming out. So I'm going to put it upside down, so it's in a naturally open position, just like that. And then to start it up, you need to start the water going. So all it does is it has water go through, slams the valve shut, and then that sends a shock wave straight up the line up to the base of the Great Pyramid. It has a reflective elbow, so it actually hits the reflective elbow from the horizontal and goes vertical and shoots it straight up in the Great Pyramid itself. And I mean, there's variations on this. You use different springs and or weights and different flow rates and stuff, but that's basically it. Very simple. With the valve, turns like this, just by rotating the valve, that changes the rate and the impact just by the gravitational spring. And then if you do it all the way up, it'll just naturally kind of shut. It doesn't have enough spring to it. We'll start it. And I've actually, right here is a plug which I've put pressure gauges on it. And I've gotten easily 125 psi spikes at that point, for sure. That's being very conservative on that figure. Here, these were actually two nipples here, two types of nipples. This is actually the pipe. So this is Schedule 80, the thick wall PVC pipe, conduit pipe. So it has a little flex to it, resilient. And the first, well, I've broken a bunch of these, but this basic PVC nipple, which the check valve screwed onto, it actually cracked it all the way around it. And these are rated for 450 psi. So then I went with a conduit one, the gray plastics conduit. And the gray plastic, it's more flexible. It doesn't crack as easily. So I tried that, and well, I cut it off because it cracked that one too. It'd run for a while, and then it just eventually just break it through shock waves. It's truly intense impacts. So right now, I'm going to go over to the pyramid itself, where the pulse generator would be. I can see the wastegate line here. And this had been under about 100 feet of bedrock. So that just sends the shock wave straight up under the pyramid. This is the correct shape and size of the scaled pyramid here, the Great Pyramid. Not perfect position yet, but it will be. So you rotate it and straight underneath it. And right now I have this running with the the dead end shaft. The dead end shaft's in the dead end position, so it's actually the valve is shut. But you can run it with the dead end shaft with a either full open or slightly reduced amount of, for back pressure. You change the back pressure, it changes the pulse rate and intensity. So what I'm going to do is just open it up just a rate. I'm going to open the valve. See, I'll hear the difference. That's actually running out this hose here. It can either be elevated or lower than the pyramid. It could have been down to the, if it was elevated for pressure, it changes the flow rate. So it does elevate, and it'll elevate to about 12 feet higher than the top of the Great Pyramid. Now, I tend to get a lot of crap about the dead end shaft being a dead end, so I just run it normally in the dead end position. End of the controversy. So I shut that off. And then I do believe there was a small, like a perk shaft with a little ball valve or just a one-way valve at the back of the subchamber. All the evidence shows it to be there. And so I actually added on this model, added a line. Here, which just allows any gases to escape. So you can actually shut it off, and that changes the impact. But if there were any gases in the chamber itself, that would allow the gases to be removed. Then over this direction, we have our descending passage coming down, and that's scaled correctly, and the angle of the length's correct to match the Great Pyramid's descending passage. And that went 100 feet, well, it was a 300-foot shaft that went 100 feet below the bedrock and went into that subterranean chamber. We've got a reservoir we've had for 5 years. We're upgrading. In the very near future, we're going to use a water tank, a potable water tank, that white plastic one over there. So swap that out, and we'll also have the water overflow, so it'll be not a lot of water running down and drilling. For the most part, that's as simple as it gets. So, ta-da.